So there's been a ton of talk recently in the WNBA or about the WNBA from outsiders like myself who are ultimately contingent on whether or not this league is going to be profitable or not, ever. About a number of things, the officiating, this new CBA, are they going to have a lockout, a strike, or whatever, or work stoppage? What's the future of women's basketball look like? And one of the things that's being brought up is the actual game itself and things that can be done to remedy it. And that's one thing I want to talk about in this video. Some things that I think the league needs to do, that I think women's basketball needs to do to make their game easier to watch and more palatable, and why that's not an insult to the ladies or anything like that. Giving precedence from other sports, and the reason that I feel like these changes need to be made. And right off the top, I'm just going to say one of those changes. I think the rims need to be lowered to 9 feet for the women, and I just want it to be known. First of all, I'm not trying to disrespect them, regardless of what they think, and I'm not looking for dunks. I understand that women are not going to dunk, no matter how far you lower the rim down. They just don't have that athleticism that allows them to have those explosive, hang time dunks, acrobatic dunks, even acrobatic layups. They can't jump as high and they can't stay in the air as long. Their muscle mass and their muscle size is a lot less than us, and they have a lot less those fast twitch fibers. And I wish I could tell you how to know exactly what all that means, but basically it's what you see. And also their size is going to plays a large part in that, and lowering the rims would actually help that, believe it or not. So I've had some people in the comments, and by the way, I love it when you guys comment on these videos. It means a lot to me. I just like being able to talk sports. And there's been some points brought up about when I've talked about lowering it to 9 feet that they don't want to see the WNBA become like the NBA, where it's an above the rim game, and they don't want to see they don't want to see it become any more of an advantage for tall people. They want to see it go back to fundamentals, and I agree with that 100%. I'm on your side with that. You and I both want to see the same thing. However, in my personal opinion, the way to go about that, based off of past precedences and just some things that I've seen recently, to me, lowering the rim is the answer to getting rid of that, believe it or not. So hang with me here. There's been a lot of I know there's been a lot of pushback to that, and you guys give me some very rational reasons why you don't think that's a good idea. So I just kind of want to give my reasoning. Unfortunately, unlike you guys in the comments, there's also a lot of irrational pushback to this by a lot of the women in the WNBA. Like they brought up to Diana Taurasi, she said you may as well put us back in skirts and put us back in the kitchen. All right, first of all, Diana, nobody wants to see you in a skirt, so we can put that away right now. But this worrying about rim height is actually nothing new. Back on, what was that, March 7th, 1954, there was an exhibition game played between two NBA teams with the rims set at 12 feet instead of 10 feet because they were worried about George Mikan basically dominating the league. So this game was played between the Minneapolis Lakers of George Mikan and the Milwaukee Hawks. So yeah, this is 1954. They were already thinking about this. This is back when I believe it was the Eisenhower administration was in the Oval Office. George Mikan was ruling the league at the time, and they're worried about that. He's a really tall guy, not very athletic, and he was able to dominate based on his height. Now, I'm not here to knock Mikan. I mean, he was a trailblazer and a pioneer, but they were worried, so they wanted to raise the rim. So it's understandable thinking. If he's not as close to the rim, it won't be as easy for him. Now, the game was an exhibition game, so of course it was kind of ugly because nobody really practiced on the 12-foot rim, so everybody struggled. But the main takeaways people took from this game back in 1954 was that raising the rim actually helped the big guys, or at least caused more problem for the little guys. Lots of people, everybody struggled to score, but it came down to the fact that the higher it was, it made it harder on the little guys and easier on the big guys. One of the people on, I believe it was the Hawks or maybe the Lakers, I can't remember, he was one of the bigger guys. It wasn't Mikan, but another one of the big guys said that he liked the 12-foot rims because that gave him a chance to set up for the rebound better. With the rim being higher, he could actually set his feet and, really prep to go get the rebound better than he could when it was 2 feet lower. So that was idea was immediately scrapped then, and they've stuck with the 10-foot rims for the 71 years since, I guess, if my math's right. Um, so it was determined then, and they talked about it again. I think there's a Sports Illustrated article in like 1967 or 69 or something like that, and talking about raising the rims because they were worried about Wilt Chamberlain. Now Wilt Chamberlain was much more athletic than George Mikan, but the problem that people were having with him was the fact that he was scoring so many points and so efficiently, even though he couldn't make a free throw. His free throw percentage was, dreadful. It was like 40%. It was definitely below 50%. It was even worse than Shaq. And so they're worried about that. And they're saying, well, how can this guy dominate the league when he can't even make an outside shot? Well, so this is nothing new. So to all the ladies who think we're targeting them, no, we've been worried about this for a while. And again, to those of you in the comments that have made, very rational takes, again, I don't want to just, I'm not here to knock you guys. I agree with what you're saying, but history has shown us that actually the higher the rim, the less likely it is the more likely it is to help the bigger guys. You might not have above the rim style, but it's still going to make it easier for them, or even harder for the smaller people. So that's why, to me, it's very important that we lower it for the women. The biggest issue I've had with the women's game watching it is there's just so many missed layups, so many missed layups, and just the inside game is very ugly. They so many block shots, a lot of physicality and ugliness. And I know a lot of that physicality can be legislated out with officiating, but at the same time, it comes down to the fact these ladies can't jump. I mean, they can't get hardly any springtime, and that's actually could be helped by lowering the rims in a roundabout way, as I'll talk about here in a second. And that's one thing it seems like anytime anybody goes to make a layup, it feels like it's a coin flip, 50-50, whether or not it's going to go in or not. I don't know what the actual percentages are, but that's what it feels like. It's not automatic. And yeah, I know sometimes men blow layups, but I mean, it's not nearly at the level that women do it. And the extreme example, of course, is Angel Reese, for which we've had all these admittedly hilarious internet meme videos and, butter pecan, bang, and all that good stuff. But, she actually led the league last year and is leading it by far this year and getting her shot blocked. And she's one of the taller people. And again, it comes to the fact that because of being a female and having more size, she gets her shot blocked a lot. So I put a link to a video in the comments here that I hope everybody will watch. It's by a guy by the name of Alexander Bromley, and he's a strength coach and a former strongman himself. I think he said he used to be the strongest man in the world in his weight class. So he really breaks it down. I hope you guys watch this. He breaks it down a lot better than I could, because he really kind of puts it into actual words what I'm thinking, what I'm seeing, and can't put into words that they need to lower these rims. First of all, it's pretty ridiculous that we're making the men and the women play under the same rim height. And again, that's not a knock to the ladies. They just naturally are smaller and less explosive. Their strengths their physical strengths do not lend themselves to sports, and that's okay. Sports should not be the end all be all. I love them. I love sports, but it shouldn't be the end all be all to who's better between men and women. When it comes to running and jumping and all that, yes, men are going to have the advantage. That doesn't mean we're better. It just means we're not equal, and that's okay. So, and you see this in other sports. So, his strength is, or this guy Alexander Bromley, he's into weightlifting and strongman stuff. Well, for women, they have a smaller bar for weightlifting, because it turned out, because their hands are such naturally smaller than men's, it was turning into more women with just naturally bigger hands had an advantage. And it was taken away from the spirit of the sport, which is who can lift the thing. Because women with the bigger hands could get a better grip, and it made it easier for them to lift the same amount of weight. Again, I encourage you to watch the video. And also gymnastics. Men's gymnastics and women's gymnastics are basically two different sports. Men have the, I forget what it's called, where they got those two hoops that hang down and the men hang on to them. And they do this thing called the Iron Cross, which makes my shoulders and chest muscles hurt just thinking about it, but where they basically hang on to put one hand on each loop and put their arms straight out and actually hold their body weight out and up. It's called the Iron Cross, and women don't have the upper body strength to do that. And so they don't do it. they stick to their strengths, which is being able to do these amazing tumbles and the uneven bars, which I don't think the men do. And like I said, it's two different sports, and like I said, they play to their strengths and advantages, and the result's very compelling. In fact, women's gymnastics is actually far more compelling than men's, and I'm pretty sure it makes more money and gets more attention. But it's just so we're not insulting the ladies by doing this. They want to act like we're literally lowering the bar. They already play with smaller basketballs, which I'll get into in a second because I think they should shrink them even more. And, they have shorter games, as the stuff Alexander Bromley mentions in his video. And the 3-point line is shorter. Now for Caitlin Clark, it doesn't matter where you put the 3-point line, she's still going to shoot long threes. She shoots well behind what would be the men's 3-point line, but for the rest of the women, it's a lot closer. And so we're not we're not like knocking them for this, and I wish they'd see that, but they strike me like they're going to be offended by anything, no matter what. But that's another story. So one thing that Alexander Bromley mentions is that the average height for an NBA player, so all the NBA players, the average height for them is a little bit above 6'6", and for WNBA players, their average height is just under 6'1", right at 6'1", maybe a little bit less. So already on average, you're looking at being a lot smaller, and then you throw in the fact that again they can't jump as well. They don't have the anatomy and the physicality to jump like that. It's really ridiculous that they play at the same rim height. And then that's compounded even more because men, he did the research, in the adult grown male population, men that are 6'6" and above are 1 in 650. So 1 in every 650 grown men are 6'6" or above. And whereas 1 in 2,000 of grown women are 6'1" or above. So automatically, right there, you're hurting the talent pool. There's not nearly as many tall women as there are tall men. And again, it's not their fault, but it's just the way it is. So you have to adjust for that, in my opinion. He talks about that. Alexander Bromley does, and I agree. And like he said, that hurts fan engagement or player engagement because these little girls, they always talk. You always hear the WNBA players, including Caitlin Clark, saying, we want to inspire little girls, and that's great. But the problem is, even though Caitlin Clark has the girl next door looks and personalities, she's very tall for a woman. The average women's height is for an adult's 5'4", so she's already 8 inches above that at 6 feet tall. So, she's probably going to inspire a lot of little girls to pick up basketballs and start trying. But, what happens when, middle school and early high school comes around and they realize that they're going to be right there at the average in height, around 5'4", or maybe even a little bit taller, 5'5" or 5'6", but they realize they're not going to make it to really at least 5'10". It seems like in the WNBA you have to be at least 5'10" to make any kind of difference. And it's really ruled by, the 6'4", 6'5" people, regardless of their athleticism, which is another thing. So you're going to have a lot of women, pulling out and saying, no, this isn't for me. I'm going to try something else. Or, I'm just going to give up on sports altogether. So it's not a good thing. So basically the rim height just causes a compounding issue. Already it's favoring the taller women and it's running off the smaller women because they know they can't compete. The fact that somebody like Angel Reese, who's so uncoordinated, is an all-star in the league, tells you about all you need to know. And I'm not doing this just to knock her, but you look at her, she literally can't dribble the ball. And that's one thing we need to get rid of. We need to get the more athletic women in there, and lowering the rim height will do that. Because it's been shown that the lower the rim height, the less daunting it is, and the less that the big people will have an advantage. The more they lower the rim, it lowers the advantage for a bigger person to a smaller person. You're going to get more athletic women in there, women who actually have some hops. Not a bunch, but it's going to make the layups easier and less missed, and it's going to make the inside game a little bit better. I know they're worried about, it's going to change the way we play. Well, do you want people to watch your shit or not? That's all I can say. Back in 1935, the NFL started to realize, this forward pass is really starting to gain people's attention. At the time, they were playing with a rugby ball. Now, to this day, the rugby ball is a lot different than the modern day NFL ball. So in 1935, they shrunk the size of the ball down to the current size you see today. They made a few little tweaks here and there to the size and shape, but before that, they were basically playing with a slightly elongated medicine ball. Um, and it was very hard to throw. Well, I'm sure they had to get used to that newer ball and how to throw it, change their grip, change their throwing motion, and everything. But they did it for the betterment of the game. They probably didn't have a choice to, which is something that probably needs to be looked at. And they just went out there and did it, and the result is the forward pass has evolved in the 90 years since, and now the NFL is what you see today. It didn't take away from the spirit of the game. The NFL football games are always won and lost in the trenches. Blocking and tackling are always going to be the two most important things to win a football game. You saw it in the Super Bowl this year. Philadelphia was a lot better than Kansas City on both lines, and the result was domination. Or not for some garbage time scoring by the Chiefs, it would have been rivaling that Super Bowl between Seattle and Denver about 10 or 12 years ago, and of course the 1989 Super Bowl between the 49ers and the Broncos. But that's kind of the precedent for that. You make the changes that have to be done, and the athletes just have to adapt, because at the end of the day, if people don't watch, your league folds, or it should, if you're not getting these yearly $10 million, $20 million, $40 million handouts to cover your losses. So that's just something they kind of have to deal with. So to me, lowering the rims would help curb this cycle of tall women ruling the sport, because like I said, it would bring in more athletes. It would bring in a larger talent pool, because that's the thing with basketball. Height's always going to be an advantage no matter what. So you're looking for tall people, and athletic tall people, which is something else that Alexander Bromley mentions in his video that I encourage watching very much. So I'm going to post a link to in the comments or the description. That's always going to be a thing. So trying to find, and the bigger you get and the taller you get, the more weight you're going to have, and the more your athleticism is going to go down. And for women, that's just again made exponentially worse as they get bigger, because they already have an advantage, and that's why you see people again like Angel Reese who can't jump. The joke, the stat stuff for folks always make is she couldn't jump over a credit card. So that's my reasoning behind that. I just think they really need to have a big rebrand, and part of that they need to lower the rims and just tell them to figure it out. I mean, you're always working on your shot anyways, so I just think that's going to have a good long-term effect, because we want this league to be profitable. I don't want to see women's basketball go away or go back to the shadows like they were before the WNBA. Even though nobody's really watched it, there's never really anywhere to go after college, and I don't want to see that happen. I want to see this league thrive, and I think that's what's going to need to happen. The other thing that's going to happen, they're going to have to. They already play with a smaller ball than the men, but they're going to have to shrink it even more. A lot of the game now is spent chasing down rebounds, because the women, their hands, they just can't. Their hands are naturally small, and they have a hard time catching these rebounds. I'd be interested to see what Angel Reese's hand size is, because she seems to be one of the few that can actually, pull the ball in consistently. It seems like when there's a rebound, the ball bounces off of about three players' hands and then rolls around, and they dive on it, and eventually jump ball's called. And I love to know how much of these 40-minute games are spent, in a rebound scrum. Kind of reminds me of Madden 95 on the Super Nintendo. Sometimes you throw it to a receiver, and then the whole team, it seems like both teams would converge on the ball in the video game, and they just bounce into each other, and the ball would bounce on top of them like it's moshing, and then fall to the ground. That's what it reminds me of in the WNBA, and I'd love to know how much of the game is spent with that. So the NBA uses a size 7 ball, which is 29.5 inches in diameter, whereas the women use a size 6, which is 28.5 inches in diameter. And I'd like to see them drop it down to a size 5, which would be 27.5. Drop the diameter of the ball another inch. That'll help improve their handles. A lot of them look very clunky and dribbling. That's where Caitlin Clark is the outlier. So I'd like to see them, make the ball smaller and lower the goals. It's okay. It's not an insult. And I really think that will bring back a lot of the fundamentals, good dribbling, good passing, easier dribbling for them, and easier passing. They're not dealing with a ball that's so much bigger for them. And I think it'll make for a better game. I really do. And the other one is a point that Sue Bird made, of all people. Um, she said, with 40-minute games, that they're allowed 6 fouls before they foul out. Well, the men are also allowed 6 fouls, but they have 48-minute games. So why aren't they dropping it down to 5 fouls to foul out? And that will take away, I think, some of the physicality, since these officials are apparently too stupid to do anything about it themselves. If they drop it down to 5 fouls, that'll discourage a lot of that, like, physical hand checking. These cheap fouls are going to become very expensive in the long term. So I like to see them drop it down to 5 fouls, shrink the ball, and lower the rims. And again, like I said, I respect everybody's who's brought up the fact they don't want to see the rims lowered, and I appreciate that. I really do. But I just wanted to kind of share my reasoning behind that, and the fact, I just want to see this league succeed. And I just don't think the product, even with Caitlin Clark, the product as it is now is not going to succeed, because without her, nobody else has stepped up. And it just seems to be, we're just like we were last year, only now this year she's hurt, and it's making it even worse. How special she is to the league and how much her specialness means to the league is even more pronounced. So I just think they're going to have to make some sweeping changes if this league's going to ever be anything other than a charity case. I don't want to see them be a charity case, but it's what they are. I mean, it's just the facts. That's what I'm talking about. I talk about what's real there. So that's just my take on that. Thank you guys for watching, and let me know what you think in the comments. Like I said, this is a good discussion, and hopefully we can keep it going. So I'll talk to you guys later.